Sometimes the greatest act of kindness is the one that changes a kingdom you never knew existed. Emily Carter had spent the last 4 years helping strangers say goodbye. At 26, she worked the evening shift at St. Gabriel Hospice just outside Boston, where every hallway carried quiet voices, soft footsteps, and the steady rhythm of people trying to make peace with time. The pay barely covered her rent for a tiny apartment, her 10-year-old sedan needed repairs she couldn't afford, and the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table seemed to grow taller every month. Yet every evening before walking through the automatic glass doors, she reminded herself of one simple promise. No one deserved to feel alone on their last day. Most patients wanted medication. Some wanted silence. Others wanted old photographs or favorite songs playing softly through worn speakers. Emily listened more than she spoke. She learned that people nearing the end rarely talked about money or success. They talked about family dinners, forgotten dreams, first dances, children, and moments they wished had lasted a little longer. That was why room 214 surprised her. The chart listed the patient as Lucian Ashcroft, 42 years old, admitted under a private medical transfer. No visitors authorized. Limited medical records. Special privacy agreement. Even the attending physician admitted he knew very little. Wealthy client, unusual condition, declining rapidly. That's all we've been told. Emily expected another lonely businessman surrounded by expensive regrets. Instead, she found a man sitting beside the window, watching the rain fall over the parking lot. He wore simple charcoal-colored clothes instead of a hospital gown, and despite the pale complexion that made him seem almost untouched by sunlight, there was an unmistakable dignity about him. His dark hair framed a face marked not by fear but by quiet acceptance. When she knocked gently, he turned toward her with calm silver-gray eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. They were the kind of eyes that made people lower their voices without realizing why. "Good evening," Emily said warmly. "I'm Emily. I'll be taking care of you tonight." A faint smile appeared. "You say that as though you're doing me a favor." She laughed softly while checking the room. "That's kind of my job." "No," he replied. "Kindness has never been part of anyone's job." The sentence lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. During the next several nights, Emily noticed little things. Fresh flowers arrived every morning with no card attached. Black luxury SUVs occasionally stopped outside the building but never parked for long. Men in tailored dark suits stood quietly across the street before disappearing again. No visitors ever signed the guest log, yet someone always seemed to know exactly how Lucian was doing. None of it made sense. Neither did the strange antique ring he never removed from his right hand. It carried an intricate silver crest unlike anything Emily had ever seen, and whenever the evening light touched its surface, the engraved symbol seemed almost alive. Still, she never asked questions. She simply changed his blankets, brought him tea, adjusted the curtains, and listened whenever he chose to speak. On a rainy Thursday evening, after nearly 2 weeks of quiet conversations, Lucian looked toward the darkening sky and spoke with unusual certainty. "Emily," he said gently, "may I ask you for one impossible favor before I disappear?" She smiled politely, expecting another request for music or memories. Instead, his next words made the entire room fall silent. "Will you marry me? So I don't leave this world completely alone." Emily could only stare at him, convinced she had misunderstood. The soft rain continued tapping against the window, while the monitor beside his bed measured each quiet heartbeat. Lucian never looked away. There was no desperation in his expression, no trace of manipulation, only an unexpected sincerity that somehow made the impossible question feel painfully real. Emily finally found her voice. "You barely know me." A gentle smile crossed his face. "Sometimes we know enough about a person's heart long before we learn their history." She lowered her eyes, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. "People usually ask someone they love." "Perhaps," Lucian answered calmly. "Or perhaps they ask the one person who has shown them kindness without expecting anything in return." Silence settled between them. Emily remembered every evening she had spent listening to him describe forgotten books, quiet lakes, and sunsets he claimed looked different every year. He never complained about his illness. He never asked why this had happened to him. Instead, he always thanked every nurse, Every orderly, every volunteer who stepped into his room. She had cared for hundreds of patients, but none carried themselves with such quiet grace. "Why me?" she whispered. Lucian looked toward the rain-covered glass before answering. "Because you still believe every life deserves dignity. That belief has become very rare." Emily felt her chest tighten. She had entered room 214 expecting another difficult goodbye. Somehow, she had become part of something she could not explain. She folded her hands together and searched for the practical answer. "Even if I wanted to help, marriage is not something people simply decide overnight." "I understand," Lucian replied. "Then allow me to ask for something smaller. Think about it until tomorrow evening. If your answer is no, I will never mention it again." She nodded slowly. "I can do that." As she prepared to leave, Lucian removed the antique silver ring from his finger and placed it gently on the bedside table. "If you return tomorrow, I would like you to hold this for a moment." Emily frowned. "Why?" "Because I have carried it for a very long time. I am curious whether it remembers kindness better than I do." Before she could ask what he meant, a knock interrupted them. Dr. Harris stepped inside carrying a clipboard. His expression remained professional, but his eyes revealed concern. After a brief examination, he quietly pulled Emily into the hallway. "His condition is declining faster than expected," he said. "If there is anything he wishes to settle, encourage him not to wait." Emily glanced back through the partially open door. Lucian had returned to watching the rain as though he had already accepted whatever tomorrow would bring. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. Boston traffic had nearly disappeared beneath the steady storm, leaving only glowing headlights reflecting across wet pavement. Emily replayed every word of their conversation. The proposal made no logical sense, yet something about it refused to leave her thoughts. When she reached her apartment, she discovered a handwritten envelope tucked beneath her door. There was no stamp, no return address. Inside rested a single sheet of thick ivory paper bearing elegant handwriting. It read, "Some promises outlive the people who make them. If he asks with sincerity, do not let him spend his final sunrise alone." There was no signature. Emily rushed into the hallway, but it was empty. No footsteps echoed on the stairs. No elevator doors closed. Only silence greeted her. She looked down at the mysterious note once more before carefully folding it into her pocket. For the first time since meeting Lucian Ashcroft, she realized that whatever story had brought him into room 214 had begun long before either of them had ever met, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, it had already begun reaching for her as well. The following evening, Emily returned to St. Gabriel Hospice with the mysterious letter still folded inside her coat pocket. She had read it at least 20 times since sunrise, hoping each reading would make it seem less impossible. It never did. Room 214 looked exactly as she had left it, except the rain had stopped and golden evening light stretched across the floor. Lucian remained by the window, his posture calm despite the growing weakness visible in every careful breath. When he noticed her, genuine warmth softened his silver-gray eyes. "You came back," he said quietly. Emily smiled. "I told you I would think about your question. I keep my promises." Lucian nodded as though he had expected nothing less. She stepped farther into the room and carefully closed the door behind her. For several moments neither of them spoke. The silence felt strangely comfortable, like two people watching the same sunset from different sides of life. Finally Emily reached into her pocket and unfolded the unsigned note. "Did you send this?" she asked. Lucian studied the elegant handwriting for several seconds before slowly shaking his head. "No. But whoever wrote it knows more than they should." Emily searched his face for any sign of deception and found none. "Then maybe this is all a coincidence." A faint smile appeared. "I stopped believing in coincidences a very long time ago." His answer sent a quiet chill through her, but before she could respond he gently picked up the antique silver ring resting beside the bed. "Would you hold this for me?" Emily hesitated only briefly before extending her hand. The metal felt unexpectedly cool, almost as though it had never been touched by sunlight. The intricate crest caught the evening light, and for a brief instant she could have sworn the engraved lines shimmered like flowing silver. She blinked once and the effect disappeared. "Beautiful craftsmanship," she whispered. Lucian watched her with unusual focus. Does it feel heavy? Emily turned the ring over in her palm. No. It is lighter than it looks. Something unreadable crossed his expression, almost relief mixed with disbelief. Interesting, he murmured. Emily frowned. What is? Nothing that should concern you today. Before she could press further, Dr. Harris entered carrying a thin folder. His expression remained gentle but solemn. Mr. Ashcroft asked me to prepare some legal documents in case he wished to complete personal matters. The physician carefully placed the folder on the bedside table before excusing himself, leaving the room once again wrapped in silence. Emily looked at the papers without opening them. You planned this? Lucian answered honestly. I hoped. There is a difference. She took a slow breath and sat beside the bed. I have spent all day asking myself why someone like you would trust someone like me. Lucian looked toward the fading sunlight beyond the window. Because titles disappear. Wealth disappears. Even memories fade. Character is the only thing that survives every season of life. Emily lowered her gaze, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. I cannot promise forever, she admitted softly. No one can, Lucian replied. I am only asking for today. Tears threatened to form, but she smiled instead. Then yes. The single word seemed to quiet the entire room. Lucian closed his eyes briefly. Not in triumph but in gratitude so profound that Emily felt she had witnessed something sacred. He reached for her hand with gentle respect, never tightening his grip beyond what she freely offered. Thank you, Emily Carter, he whispered. You have given me more peace than you could possibly imagine. Outside the window, a black sedan slowly rolled into the parking lot before stopping beneath the shadows of a large oak tree. Another arrived behind it. Then another. Their headlights remained off, their engines almost silent. Emily never noticed them. But inside every vehicle, elegantly dressed men and women waited without speaking, their eyes fixed on the softly glowing window of room 214 as though history itself was preparing to change before the night was over. The ceremony took place less than an hour later inside the hospice chapel, where soft candlelight reflected across polished wooden pews and stained glass painted gentle colors across the quiet room. There were no rows of guests, no music, and no elaborate decorations. Dr. Harris agreed to witness the marriage along with an elderly volunteer named Margaret, who had spent nearly 20 years comforting families during their hardest moments. Emily borrowed a simple ivory cardigan from the volunteer closet after Margaret insisted every bride deserved something light to wear. Lucian remained seated for most of the ceremony, his strength fading with every passing minute, yet his expression carried a peaceful confidence that Emily had never seen before. When the officiant asked whether they entered this marriage of their own free will, both answered with quiet certainty. Lucian looked directly into Emily's eyes as he spoke every vow without hesitation, as though he had been waiting much longer than a lifetime to say those words. Emily repeated her promises with a trembling voice, still unable to believe how dramatically one ordinary week had transformed her life. When the officiant announced them husband and wife, Lucian did not celebrate. He simply smiled. With deep gratitude, gently kissed the back of Emily's hand and whispered, "Thank you for giving a lonely man a home, even if only for a single evening." The words stayed with her long after the ceremony ended. They spent another hour talking about ordinary things. Lucian wanted to know what Emily's favorite season was, whether she still visited her parents' hometown in Vermont, and what kind of house she once dreamed of owning. He listened to every answer as though each detail was priceless. In return, he spoke of old libraries, mountain sunrises, and a place where the stars looked close enough to touch. Whenever Emily asked where that place was, he only smiled and answered, "Farther away than most maps can reach." Shortly after midnight, the monitors beside his bed began sounding softer, slower rhythms. Nurses quietly entered and adjusted medications while Dr. Harris stood respectfully near the doorway. Emily remained beside Lucian, holding his hand exactly as she had promised. He looked peaceful rather than frightened. His silver-gray eyes rested on hers one final time. "Do not blame yourself for what comes next," he whispered. "This is only one chapter ending." Emily tried to answer, but emotion caught in her throat. Lucian slowly removed the antique ring from his finger once more and placed it gently into her palm before closing her fingers around it. "Keep this safe until morning," he said. "No matter who asks for it." She nodded through quiet tears. "I promise." A faint smile appeared. "I know." Moments later he closed his eyes. The room became still. Dr. Harris stepped forward, carefully checked the monitors, then lowered his head with quiet respect. Margaret softly covered her mouth while another nurse reached over and dimmed the bedside light. No one rushed. No one spoke above a whisper. Emily remained seated beside the bed, unable to move, still holding the cool silver ring in her hand. Outside the hospice, every black vehicle that had silently gathered throughout the evening started its engine at exactly the same moment. Headlights illuminated the parking lot in perfect unison before fading again. Nearly 50 elegantly dressed men and women stepped from their vehicles without speaking. They formed orderly lines beneath the night sky, their posture disciplined, their expressions solemn. Every one of them faced the window of room 214. Then, as though following an ancient command heard only by them, they slowly lowered themselves onto one knee. Inside the hospice, no nurse noticed. No doctor looked outside. Only Emily happened to glance toward the window after hearing the faint sound of car doors closing. Her breath caught. The entire parking lot had become a silent gathering unlike anything she had ever imagined, and every single person waiting beneath the moon seemed to be honoring the man she had married only hours before. Emily stood frozen beside the window, unable to understand what she was seeing. The parking lot had become a sea of silent figures dressed in elegant black coats and tailored suits, every one of them remaining perfectly still beneath the pale glow of the streetlights. Not a single voice could be heard. Not a single person looked away from room 214. The silence felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, carrying a weight that made the ordinary hospice seem connected to something far older than the modern world outside its walls. Dr. Harris noticed the expression on Emily's face and walked toward the window. The moment he saw the gathering below, he stopped mid-step. "Who are they?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Before Emily could answer, a soft knock echoed through the room. It was calm, measured, and somehow more commanding than any urgent pounding could have been. One of the nurses carefully opened the door. Standing in the hallway was a tall man with silver hair neatly combed back, wearing a perfectly tailored black overcoat despite the late hour. His posture was flawless. His expression remained respectful, yet his quiet presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. Behind him stood 6 other men and women dressed with the same understated elegance. None of them entered until invited. The silver-haired gentleman inclined his head toward Dr. Harris before turning to Emily. "Mrs. Ashcroft," he said with remarkable composure, "please accept our deepest gratitude for honoring His Majesty's final request." Emily blinked in confusion. "I think you have mistaken me for someone else." The gentleman gently shook his head. "There has been no mistake." He glanced toward Lucian with unmistakable reverence before continuing. "You are the lawful wife of King Lucian Ashcroft." The room fell completely silent. Emily searched every face for some sign that this was an elaborate misunderstanding, but none appeared. Dr. Harris stared speechless while the nurses exchanged uncertain glances. "King," Emily repeated quietly. "Lucian was never." The gentleman finished her sentence with calm certainty. "He chose not to reveal his position while he lived among ordinary people. It was his wish that you learn the truth only after your vows had been freely given." Emily instinctively stepped backward. "This cannot be real." The gentleman reached inside his coat and carefully presented a small leather case. Opening it with both hands, he revealed an ancient document bearing an elaborate crimson seal together with a beautifully crafted crown-shaped crest identical to the engraving on the silver ring resting in Emily's hand. "For more than 6 centuries," he said softly, "this seal has identified the sovereign of our kingdom. The ring you now carry is the crown signet. There is only one in existence." Emily slowly opened her trembling hand. The silver ring seemed different now, its intricate design reflecting the light with quiet brilliance. The gentleman's eyes rested on it for only a moment before he respectfully lowered his gaze. None of the others dared look directly at it. "According to our oldest laws," he continued, "the crown signet remains with the Queen until the King awakens." Emily barely heard the last sentence. "Awakens?" she asked. Dr. Harris confirmed. The physicians of your world performed their duties with honor, the gentleman answered gently. They judged according to human understanding. Our understanding follows older laws. He paused before adding words that caused every heartbeat in the room to feel suddenly louder. His Majesty has not reached the end of his journey. He has entered the great slumber, an ancient passage that no ruler may avoid. Until it is completed, the crown cannot be claimed, the throne cannot be occupied, and no vow spoken between husband and wife may be broken. Emily looked from Lucian's peaceful face to the ring resting in her palm, then back to the gathering outside, where every kneeling figure remained motionless beneath the night sky, patiently awaiting the decision of the woman who only yesterday believed she was nothing more than an ordinary hospice caregiver. Emily could not find the words to answer. Every belief she had carried her entire life seemed to shift beneath her feet. She looked once more at Lucian's peaceful face. He appeared exactly as he had only minutes earlier, calm, dignified, and resting as though he had simply fallen asleep after a long conversation. Yet the silver-haired gentleman spoke with complete certainty, never raising his voice, never asking her to believe him. It was as though the truth required no argument. My name is Alistair Graves, he said with another respectful bow. I have served the crown for over 300 years. My highest responsibility has always been to protect the royal family. Tonight, that responsibility belongs to you as well. Emily almost laughed from disbelief, but the sound never came. 300 years, she repeated softly. Alistair simply nodded. Time flows differently for our kind. Dr. Harris finally found his voice. This is impossible. For your world, Alistair answered kindly. For ours it is history. He reached into the leather case and carefully removed a folded parchment whose edges shimmered with age. The paper appeared older than any document Emily had ever seen in a museum, yet every line of ink remained perfectly clear. At the bottom were two elegant signatures. One belonged to Lucian Ashcroft. The other space, outlined in delicate silver, had remained empty until only hours earlier. As Emily instinctively moved closer, new handwriting slowly emerged across the blank space without any pen touching the page. Letter by letter, her own name appeared in graceful script. Emily Carter Ashcroft. She immediately stepped backward. How is that possible? Alistair carefully closed the document. The covenant recognizes promises freely given. It has waited patiently for your answer. Emily looked down at the simple wedding band resting on her finger. It felt warmer now than it had during the ceremony. Almost alive. A gentle breeze drifted through the slightly opened window, although the night outside remained completely still. The curtains lifted softly before settling again. At the same moment, the silver ring resting in Emily's palm released the faintest golden glow, so subtle that she wondered whether exhaustion had begun playing tricks on her mind. Alistair noticed it immediately. His expression softened with quiet relief. The crown has accepted you. Before Emily could respond, another elegant woman entered the room. She wore a dark emerald coat fastened with an antique silver clasp and carried herself with remarkable confidence. Unlike the others, she looked directly at Emily with unmistakable warmth. Forgive the interruption, she said gently. My name is Lady Eleanor Whitmore. His Majesty asked me to deliver something only after the ceremony had taken place. From inside her coat she removed a small velvet box and offered it with both hands. Emily slowly opened it. Inside rested a neatly folded letter sealed with dark crimson wax. Her heart immediately recognized Lucian's handwriting across the front. For my wife. Her fingers trembled as she carefully broke the seal. The first line brought unexpected tears to her eyes. If you are reading this, it means I trusted my heart one final time. And once again, kindness proved stronger than fear. Emily continued reading silently while every person in the room respectfully lowered their gaze. Lucian explained that the great slumber could only begin after he had willingly entrusted both his heart and his kingdom to someone untouched by ambition. Power could never awaken him. Ancient bloodlines could never awaken him. Only a promise born entirely from compassion could complete the forgotten covenant made centuries before. Emily slowly lowered the letter, struggling to breathe through overwhelming emotion. Everything he had done suddenly made sense. Every conversation, every quiet smile, Every question about kindness and dignity. None of it had been accidental. Alistair stepped forward one final time. "Your Majesty," he said softly, addressing her with complete sincerity for the very first time. "Before sunrise we must escort you to Ashcroft Castle. The kingdom has waited 600 years for this night. And there are many who will celebrate your arrival. There are also many who will do everything within their power to prevent the king from ever opening his eyes again." Emily stood beside Lucian's bed for one last quiet moment before gently folding his letter and placing it inside her coat pocket. Everything about the room still looked ordinary. The soft hum of medical equipment, the warm overhead lights, the scent of fresh linen, and the half-finished cup of tea resting on the windowsill all belonged to the life she understood. Yet beyond the doorway, another world was already waiting. Alistair respectfully stepped aside as Emily slowly walked into the hallway. Every nurse, doctor, and staff member they passed seemed unusually calm, almost as though an invisible peace had settled over the building. Dr. Harris quietly approached and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I do not understand any of this," he admitted honestly. "But I know one thing. Mr. Ashcroft trusted you completely. Whatever comes next, do not forget the person you were before tonight." Emily smiled through uncertain eyes. "I will try." Outside, the cool night air greeted her as the hospice doors opened. The moment her shoes touched the pavement, every man and woman waiting in the parking lot slowly rose from one knee in perfect unison. Not a single person spoke. Instead, they respectfully lowered their heads as Emily walked forward beside Alistair. She instinctively glanced behind her, expecting cameras or reporters, but the street remained completely empty. It was as though the entire city had somehow fallen asleep. Waiting at the center of the gathering stood an elegant midnight blue limousine unlike any vehicle Emily had ever seen. Its polished surface reflected the moonlight almost like black glass. A uniformed chauffeur opened the rear door without saying a word. Before Emily entered, Lady Eleanor stepped beside her and gently adjusted the borrowed ivory cardigan she still wore from the ceremony. "His Majesty once told me that true royalty is measured by kindness, never by crowns," she said softly. "That is why he chose you." Emily looked down at herself and almost laughed. Her comfortable nursing shoes were slightly worn, a loose strand of hair had escaped her ponytail hours earlier, and her wedding band still felt impossibly new on her finger. She looked nothing like a queen. "I think everyone is expecting someone else," she whispered. Eleanor smiled warmly. "That feeling disappears eventually. The kindness never should." As the limousine began moving through the quiet streets outside Boston, Emily noticed something impossible. Every traffic light along the route turned green before they reached it. Every intersection remained completely empty despite the late evening. No police escorts appeared, yet every road ahead seemed prepared for their arrival. After nearly 40 minutes, the city lights slowly disappeared behind them. Dense forests surrounded the narrow highway until massive wrought iron gates emerged from the darkness. They stood nearly 30 feet tall, decorated with intricate silver vines and an ancient crest identical to the one engraved upon Lucian's ring. Without anyone touching them, the gates silently opened inward. Beyond them stretched a long stone roadway lined with towering oak trees whose branches formed a natural arch beneath the moonlight. Emily stared through the window without speaking. At the end of the road, illuminated by hundreds of warm golden lights, stood an enormous castle rising above the surrounding cliffs. Its graceful towers reached toward the night sky while stained glass windows reflected colors that seemed almost unreal. It looked less like a fortress and more like something preserved from another century. As the limousine approached the front courtyard, hundreds of elegantly dressed men and women already waited on the grand staircase. Their clothing reflected traditions from different eras, yet every face remained turned toward the arriving vehicle with solemn expectation. Before the chauffeur could open Emily's door, the massive front entrance of the castle slowly swung open. An older gentleman wearing a deep crimson ceremonial robe stepped forward carrying an ornate silver staff. His voice echoed clearly across the silent courtyard. "By the authority of the ancient council, I formally object. A human shall never sit upon the crimson throne. The marriage may stand, but the kingdom will never recognize her as its queen." The welcoming silence vanished instantly, replaced by a tension so deep that even the wind seemed to stop moving beneath the ancient towers. No one answered the elder immediately. Hundreds of eyes shifted between the crimson-robed counselor and Emily, waiting to see who would speak first. The cool night air carried only the distant rustle of ancient trees surrounding the castle. Emily felt every gaze settle upon her. Yet instead of stepping backward, she quietly walked out of the limousine and faced the grand staircase with the same calm expression she had worn while comforting frightened patients. She had never imagined standing before a royal court, but fear felt strangely familiar. Fear was present whenever a family received difficult news, whenever someone faced an uncertain tomorrow, and kindness had always been her answer. Alistair moved forward, his voice steady and respectful. "Counselor Magnus, the Covenant has recognized the marriage. The crown signet rests with Her Majesty. The ancient laws have already spoken." The older counselor tightened his grip on the silver staff. "The Covenant cannot erase 600 years of tradition. She carries no royal blood. She knows nothing of our history. She cannot lead our people." Murmurs spread gently across the gathered nobles. Some nodded in agreement while others remained silent. Emily looked from one face to another. None appeared cruel. Most simply looked uncertain, as though they feared everything familiar was about to disappear. She suddenly understood that they were mourning in their own way. They had lost their king, at least for now, and a complete stranger had appeared carrying his ring. She slowly climbed the first few marble steps until she stood only a short distance from Counselor Magnus. "May I ask you a question?" she said softly. The unexpected politeness caught him off guard. After a brief pause, he inclined his head. "You may." Emily glanced toward the magnificent castle behind him. How many people in this kingdom loved Lucian because he wore a crown? The counselor frowned but remained silent. She continued gently. And how many loved him because of the man he chose to be? The courtyard grew quiet once again. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking from the heart. "I do not want anyone's throne. I never asked for a title. Yesterday I believed I would spend my life caring for patients in a small hospice outside Boston, and I was perfectly content with that future. If Lucian had told me who he truly was before asking me to marry him, I probably would have believed he was joking." A few quiet smiles appeared among the crowd. Even Counselor Magnus seemed less rigid than before. Emily continued. "The only reason I said yes was because I did not want another human being to leave this world believing he was alone." Lady Eleanor quietly brushed away a tear while several attendants lowered their heads. Emily reached into her coat pocket and unfolded Lucian's letter. He wrote that kindness was stronger than fear. "If I dishonor those words, then I do not deserve to stand here." She carefully held up the silver ring. "If any law says I must protect this until he returns, then I will protect it. If your customs require me to learn, then I will learn. But I will never ask anyone to kneel before me. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned." A soft golden glow suddenly spread across the ancient crest engraved on the ring. It grew brighter with every heartbeat, illuminating Emily's face with warm light instead of harsh brilliance. At the exact same moment, intricate silver patterns slowly appeared across the marble beneath her feet, forming an enormous circular symbol that stretched across the entrance courtyard. Gasps echoed through the gathering. Alistair immediately lowered himself onto one knee. Lady Eleanor followed. One by one nobles, who had served the crown for centuries, did the same. Counselor Magnus stared at the glowing symbol in stunned silence before looking toward the massive castle doors. Deep within the ancient halls, a single bell began to ring. Then another answered. Soon dozens of cathedral bells echoed through the mountains surrounding the castle. Alistair lifted his eyes with unmistakable wonder. "The castle heart has awakened," he whispered. "It has not answered a living soul since the day King Lucian entered the great slumber. The kingdom itself has accepted its queen." The ancient bells continued echoing across the mountains long after their final notes should have faded, as though the castle itself refused to let the moment end. Emily stood quietly within the glowing silver circle, still holding Lucian's ring, unable to explain what had just happened. One by one, the nobles who had remained uncertain lowered their heads in respectful silence. Even Counselor Magnus slowly rested the base of his silver staff upon the marble floor before bowing with measured dignity. "The castle heart has spoken," he said at last. "No council possesses authority greater than the ancient covenant. Alistair rose and smiled for the first time since Emily had met him. "Welcome home, Your Majesty." The massive castle doors opened fully, revealing a grand entrance hall lined with towering columns, crystal chandeliers, and portraits of rulers whose watchful eyes seemed almost alive beneath the warm candlelight. Emily stepped across the threshold slowly, still feeling more like the hospice caregiver she had been only yesterday than the queen everyone now addressed. Servants greeted her with respectful smiles instead of fearful expressions. Lady Eleanor quietly walked beside her, explaining the history surrounding each hallway and chamber. Every room carried memories of generations who had ruled not through fear, but through solemn responsibility. At the center of the castle stood a circular chamber unlike any Emily had ever imagined. Beneath a magnificent glass dome rested an elevated platform carved from white stone. Upon it stood two empty thrones. One was crafted from polished obsidian trimmed with silver. The other remained untouched, waiting beside it. "His Majesty ordered the second throne completed many years ago," Eleanor whispered. "Everyone believed he was preparing for a future alliance. None of us realized he had already begun waiting for you." Emily looked at the empty seat in astonishment. "He did this before we ever met?" Alistair nodded gently. King Lucian always believed destiny arrived quietly. He simply chose to leave room for it. Before anyone could continue, a warm breeze drifted through the chamber although every window remained closed. The crown signet in Emily's hand glowed once again, brighter than before. At the same instant, a distant heartbeat echoed softly through the hall. Once, then again. Every noble lifted their head. The sound was unmistakable. Slow, steady, alive. Deep beneath the castle, hidden within chambers untouched for centuries, ancient mechanisms quietly awakened. Crystal lanterns illuminated one corridor after another without a single servant lighting them. Vines climbing the outer walls began blooming with pale white flowers despite the late season. The entire castle seemed to inhale after holding its breath for generations. Alistair's eyes filled with quiet emotion. The great slumber is ending sooner than any prophecy predicted. Emily instinctively pressed Lucian's letter against her heart. Is he waking up? No one answered immediately. Then from somewhere far below, footsteps echoed across polished stone. Calm, unhurried, familiar. Every person in the chamber turned toward the enormous doors leading into the inner sanctuary. The doors slowly opened by themselves. A tall figure emerged from the soft golden light beyond. His dark hair rested neatly across his forehead. His silver-gray eyes reflected the same quiet warmth Emily remembered from room 214. He looked healthier than she had ever seen him, his posture strong, his peaceful smile unchanged. For several silent seconds, neither of them moved. Lucian crossed the chamber with measured steps before stopping directly in front of Emily. Without a word, he gently took her trembling hands into his own. Then before the entire royal court, the king slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps spread throughout the hall, but no one dared interrupt. Looking up at Emily with unmistakable gratitude, Lucian spoke the words that would be remembered throughout the kingdom for generations. "The greatest throne I ever found was never carved from stone. It was the heart of the woman who showed kindness to a lonely stranger without asking who he was. Today I do not present my queen because destiny commanded it. I present my queen because compassion accomplished what power never could." In that moment every bell across the kingdom rang once more, and the oldest lesson of the ancient realm became its newest truth. Even the coldest king will always kneel before genuine kindness.